dedicated to our vigil here for the refugees on the southern border of the United States in 2019.
you. That was a beautiful prayer. All said without words. So, brothers and sisters, Ireland and the U.S. have close immigration ties in both directions, and these have been around for many years. As a result, the U.S. detention policies resonate with all of us here today, and they also serve as a potential warning to Ireland and the rest of the EU as we wrestle with problems of immigration and asylum on this side of the Atlantic as well. In our Abrahamic faith tradition, back around the year 600 before the Common Era, there was a Jewish refugee in Iraq, or Babylon, as was known then. This refugee's name was Ezekiel. He was perhaps more than a refugee, because he was also being held and forced to exile. Ezekiel is remembered today for the revelations that he would receive. For example, it was revealed to Ezekiel that people would get all enthused about going to worship services, participating in the congregation, and listening to the word. But it would be as if they were going to a concert to see a celebrity or an entertainer. They would say things like, "Great sermon, wonderful music, well done." But they would not put the principles that they had heard into practice in their lives. Instead, they would go on living sanctimonious lives of exploitation, denial, and hypocrisy. And here we are. There are about 24 explicit biblical references to immigrants. Yet the U.S., in its cloak of Christian nationalism, maintains deliberate policies that are immoral and inhumane, illegal and extrajudicial, and insidious, as they use cruelty and terrorism to create political effects. Just to give you a sense of the degree to which these policies are institutionalized, I'll mention a couple of things. The Trump administration argued before the Ninth Circuit Court panel just last month in June that the U.S. government is not required to give soap or toothbrushes to children apprehended on the U.S.-Mexican border. And it can have them sleep on concrete floors in frigid and overcrowded cells. They maintain this despite previous court rulings that require detainees be kept in safe and sanitary facilities. Another one. Amnesty International has found that since 2018, the United States government has executed an unlawful and politically motivated campaign of intimidation, threats, harassment, criminal investigations against migrant human rights defenders on the U.S.-Mexican border. The government's measures have included overt harassment of activists through surveillance and intelligence gathering by multiple law enforcement agencies, warrantless and unreasonable searches of their electronic devices, prolonged interrogations about their finances and relations to other activists, prolonged detentions, invasive searches, and false arrests, discriminatory threats and travel restrictions at the U.S.-Mexican border, including through the placement of migratory alerts and revocation of fast travel documents. And then finally, the arrest and conviction of volunteers leaving food and water for migrants. Currently, there are about 52,000 migrants being held in custody. The majority of them, almost 3/4, 71%, according to the National Immigration Justice Center, are housed in facilities operated by private prison companies who have no transparency or accountability. The two largest contractors are the CEO Group and Core Civic. These two companies had revenues combined totaling about $4.1 billion last year, and detention contracts made up a quarter of that. Core Civic and CEO Group spent $1.6 million and $2.8 million respectively on political contributions and lobbying in just 2018, and these overwhelmingly went to the Republican candidates in Trump's party. Oh, by the way, these two corporations are lavish users of Trump resorts and hotels. Since 2016, there's been a private Facebook group called I'm1015. Now that term, I'm1015, is the Border Patrol's radio code for alien in custody. This Facebook group boasted about 9,500 members from across the country, and these were current or former Border Patrol agents. Now keep in mind, there's only 20,000 people in the Border Patrol service. So this was a significant percentage of participation by the employees. This Facebook group joked about deaths of immigrants, discussed throwing burritos at Latino members of the U.S. Congress when they would come to visit a detention facility, posted vulgar illustrations, such as one that depicts U.S. Congressional Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez engaged in forced oral sex with President Donald Trump. Oh yes, this exploitation is institutionalized. There is no plausible deniability. In another of his revelations, Ezekiel told us that when bad things are going to happen, society will be protected by those who will warn the people. Ezekiel presents these protectors as watchmen, keeping vigil and setting off an alarm to the towers of the city wall. Ezekiel further cautions that if the people hear the sound of the alarm and then they ignore it, they will have to accept the consequences as their own fault. However, if the watchmen do not send off the alarm, then they themselves will be accountable for the harm that befalls their community. So here's what some of the watchmen and watchwomen are telling us about U.S. detention policies. Holly Cooper, who co-directs the University of California's Immigration Law Clinic and represents detained youth, says, "In my 22 years of doing visits with children in detention, I have never heard of this level of inhumanity." Dr. Julie Litton, who co-chairs the American Academy of Pediatrics Immigrant Health Special Interest Group, said this when she went to the Border Patrol stations: "These facilities are anything but child-friendly. That type of environment is not only unhealthy for children, but also unsafe." San Francisco psychoanalyst Gilbert Kilman has evaluated about 50 children and parents seeking asylum. He tells of the trauma that the internment has already caused lifelong damage to these youngsters. He says, "The care of children by children constitutes a betrayal of adult responsibility and governmental responsibility." Dr. Nancy Wang, a pediatric emergency physician at Stanford, who was part of an inspection team, says, "If a child came into her emergency room and reported this kind of treatment, under the law, she would be obligated to report it as child neglect." And finally, Dr. Dolly Lucio-Seaver wrote in a medical declaration of the detention facility she witnessed, "Extreme cold temperatures, lights on 24 hours a day, no adequate access to medical care, basic sanitation, water, and inadequate food, tantamount to intentionally causing the spread of disease. It felt worse than jail. It just felt, lawless. I mean, imagine your own children there. I can't imagine my child being there and not being broken. The conditions within which they're held could be compared to torture facilities." So, brothers and sisters, we have the watchmen and the watchwomen, and they have set off the alarm. people are accountable. And the consequences are for all of us. So I encourage you all, us all, to continue to support the watchmen and the watchwomen as they help us bring these conditions to light in a way that's undeniable and will move people's hearts. Thank you very much.
Thank you. First of all, thank each of you for joining us here this evening. Each of you, by your presence, shows that you care about people that you will never meet, whose names that you will never know, whose hands you will never shake, people that you will never hug, but you show this evening that you care for each of them. So we'll end with a short blessing and a reminder that what we call God has many names and has many understandings. Each name and each understanding is valid and is personal and unique to each of us. So whatever your understanding of what we call God, whatever you name that God, may you walk in the peace of that God as you leave. In the week ahead, may you walk with that peace. And if you should return at any time in the future, make sure to bring that peace of your God with you here. Thank you for being here, and may God bless each of you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Well, let's have tea and biscuits.
All right.
Extravagance.
And enjoy each other's company. What? Oh, yes, please. If you would bring back your chair. Thank you.